Yeah, and real quick, James, I just want to address this comment from David. Confusion being when the manufacturer sends anti-shorts with every roll of MC. That's true, David, and that's another reason why I decided to run a lot of these myths. I guarantee I'm not going to get through to everybody on them, but there's times where they've sent luminaires out that are LED with these fixture disconnects on the end of the LED, and like you were supposed to use them or something. And so that is true, David. That's where a lot of this confusion comes from, and that's what makes the myths. So
That's
sorry
true.
to interrupt your topic there, James, but go ahead, continue.
No worries. I will say this: I'm not doing a whole bunch of these tonight. To be honest, I didn't feel like doing these, so I
Okay.
put together a few up into Article 230. I'll start 240 next week. I was about to do some of them. I was like, that's all I'm doing. My as I was doing all these, my eyes were watering. I was like, man, it's going to be a tough night. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, what they did here, this is in 225.31, and A and B is where they made the changes. And what they did, they made a revision here. And what this is revision is going to be dealing with is the disconnect, where it acts as the emergency disconnect means for your outside feeders and branch circuits. And what they did here is they're clarifying what the requirements are regarding the disconnecting means, and this is dependent on if it's located inside or outside of the building. Okay,
True.
so what they're telling you here is, and you're going to see some other things that took place where they've moved some stuff around where it was in another section, they've moved it over here to another area, and you're going to start seeing they're doing some consistency here. Now, let me explain why this is important. And you've heard me say this many times as we've we've gone through, and somebody's asking grounding and bonding questions, or we were doing a topic on grounding and bonding. And I said, the
Mm-hmm.
one thing you're always looking at is where's your first disconnecting means? And
Yeah.
when you set up the first disconnecting means, that affects your grounding and bonding also. And
True.
we're gonna get to another one here in a little bit, and they're gonna make specific mention of that in the committee statement. Okay, and I'm going to go through and explain that a little bit more. But what they're going to tell you here in A, they say if the disconnecting means is used as the emergency disconnect, it shall comply with 225.41. We're going to get into that in a little bit.
Yeah, and one thing I want to do is, as well as give a shout out to Worm Bros. What's up, fam? Awesome.
What,
Thanks for
brother?
jumping in. Is just let everyone know that these are proposed. These are not have not been finalized for the code, so this language could change. We're not saying this is gospel at this time, so just keep in mind. Don't get us wrong. Like nobody ever gets us wrong, James, but we just don't want nobody twisting around saying that we're saying this is exactly what the code's going to say in 2026.
Well, I tell you, most of the time when I'm looking at these changes, usually the most of it has been 100% affirmative by all the code making panel members. So
Yep,
more than likely, there's a good chance you're going to see this in the next cycle. That
agree.
I would say you're probably 95% chance. Now, one of the things that happen, they may come in and change some wording and stuff, but the overall concept of what they're looking at doing, this is probably going to take place. So, what they tell you in B is they say if that disconnecting means is located inside, it has to be at a readily accessible location nearest the point of entrance of the conductors. And if it's the disconnecting means is located outside the building, then they tell you it has to be at a readily accessible location or within sight of the building, which is in accordance 110.29, which means it has to be within 50 foot. Okay, so we're going to get into that a little bit and go a little bit deeper into this in a little bit. But the one thing I want to point out is they say for the purpose of this section in B, the the requirements in 230.6. So we're going to get into
Okay.
all of that here in just a little bit. But
Yeah, and I think there was some 2023 changes in that within site and all that kind of stuff.
yeah, well, they used to have it in Article 100 definition of within sight, insight from, and all of that. And then they
Yeah.
moved it to 110.29 because Article 110 is a general requirement. All right.
Gotcha.
Now, this is where you're going to get into, and this is where they get into the emergency disconnects. And this is dealing for 1 and 2 family dwelling units. All right. Now, we had the main one there for the location and talking about it being in a readily accessible outdoor location or within sight. And then they added an exception here. This is where, if you go back and look at this one right here, and you look at the very first, it tells you in A, the disconnecting means is use emergency disconnect. It shall comply with what? 225.41. Well, that's where we are right now. We're in 41 right here. Okay.
Right.
Now, what it says in the exception here, it says if the service disconnecting means complies with 230.70A2 or the disconnecting means is in accordance with 225.31, which is where we're at, is in a readily accessible outdoor location or within sight of the 1 and 2 family dwelling unit, an additional emergency disconnect shall not be required. Okay.
Right.
Now, this is interesting because I want you to see what the committee statement said here, and you'll start to see where all this is starting to tie in. It says
Right.
the proposed change is necessary in order to clarify that the equipment that the disconnect is part of must have a short circuit current rating not less than the available fault current. Now, I just want to stop there for a second. Now, you've heard me go through all this before. Some that hadn't been on here might not have heard me go through this. But being on the 70E committee, which, I've pretty much been there since it started. And the old 70E, what we used to have in there is we would take and basically we would make that document pretty much look like the OSHA document dealing with OSHA 1910, 302 through 308. And this got into dealing with the installation of equipment for safety. That's basically what it was.
I agree.
Now, none of that's in there. Now, when that happened, we started making changes over the years, and I was actually on the task group that was involved in developing the table. Table 130.7 C15 A, B, and C. Okay.
Right.
A deals with your AC, B deals with your DC now, and C is where you select your PPE. Well, when we did that, we basically, I tell people, they go, why'd y'all do that table? Well, the reason that table was done was for a contractor that comes out on the job and he needs to take and provide PPE for his personnel. They need to be trained on this. Well, when you look at that table, we had parameters that are underneath those tables there when we started, and we would tell you it had to meet a certain clearing time and available short circuit current or available fault current, whatever you want to call it, same thing.
Sure.
Well, the problem was when you go out on the job, you could never get the available fault current for the service out there. So we ended up with a problem. So it wasn't long after that, maybe the next cycle, or maybe the next one after that, we added 110.24 in the National Electrical Code that deals with available fault current, and now you're required to put that available fault current. Now, you'll remember when we started, I was going over as 2026. Now you go look at 110.16, look at them now, they're telling you the available fault current has to be where? On the label there. It just isn't a warning anymore that you have exposure. So now they're telling you we want this certain information. Well, that's what we're getting into right here. because if you come out and this is going to be your first disconnecting means here, naturally it has to be in a readily accessible location, and then it has to be within 50 foot of the dwelling unit. Okay, so taking setting something out that's 100 yards away out on pole and then running a feeder in, that's no longer going to be allowed. You're going to have to be within 50 foot. Okay, so I'm trying to tie everybody in so you understand exactly what's taking place here. Okay.
So I want to add another little something to this, James. So a lot of times, what we have to do when we're like doing this risk assessment, when we're going to like work on this equipment, this available fault current could signal some red flags for these qualified people that's out there. So, and this actually happened on one of the jobs I was on. So we went out there. We're looking at the available fault current. The AHJ's telling me available fault current is 26K. Well, I can tell you right now, I just looked at that equipment that was out there. I knew it was all 10K rated. So I know that I'm not going to be opening that up and expecting electrically safe work condition, working on it with verified energize, because you have that potential for unintentional rapid disassembly in the field, and we don't like those. That is ungood, as Tommy D would say. And so, this is the kind of stuff that we have to look at when you go up there. Like, if you're going to work on something and you see burn marks, or you see, you see problems, like you see screws glowing or something like that, that's going to be one of those conditions where you just don't want to, have that happen,
Right.
So, and awesome. I see you popped in the link up in there. So that's awesome, James. Everyone's got to go
do that
check
earlier,
out.
and I forgot. But
Yeah.
anyway, looking at this, I want to point something out, because they tell you the last sentence here in the committee statement. It says the proposed exception to 225.41A1 ensures that two disconnecting means are not required when the service or outside feeder or branch circuit disconnecting means are used as emergency disconnecting means. Now, why is this important? Nice. Because I want you to see what they're calling it. They're not calling it service conductors. They're calling it what? A feeder or branch circuit. And that's what I'm saying. You establish that first disconnecting means, well, when I come in to that structure at that point, that's a feeder coming in. Depending on what you're feeding, of course. But what to say you're feeding the house. You're coming in, that becomes a feeder. That automatically is going to tell you right there that you're going to have to take at that point, and that feeder coming in, that neutral has to be isolated. It will not be grounded there.
That's a really good comment there, Worm Bro. Yeah, dude. You have to really look at normal operating condition and, condition of maintenance too, and like I say, there's been times before where I've seen like burn marks, or I've seen like a lot of abnormal conditions, and I'd be apprehensive working on that while energizing. I just tell them, let's shut it off and get it into a normal operating condition.
You'll remember I actually did a presentation. It's been at least 6, 7, 8 months ago, that I actually went through and explained normal operating conditions and everything, tying it in with 70E, because somebody on one of the groups was saying something that was completely wrong, and then I went in and laid it out, and he actually contacted me and said, I never knew that. And I was like, well, being on the 70E committee since it started, you've heard pretty much every argument for everything. So I like to consider
100%.
All right. Now, this is where you're getting into 230.70. Okay. And they made some changes here. Actually, they made quite a few changes here. And this is where they get in talking about you having the means put in there, something disconnected. In other words, all your ungrounded conductors in a building or structure. Okay. Now, they did in A for the service disconnect location, they did a little bit of changes there and told you Just don't look at 230.70A1. You need to look at A2, 3, and 4 also. And then they got
Right.
into the readily accessible location. It's made some minor fix-ups there. But when you look at A2, this is new. This is where we get into 1 and 2 family dwellings. All right.
Wow, there's quite a bit of new language in there. That's a lot of green in there.
Yeah. Well, when I explain it, you'll understand why. And getting back to the emergency disconnect. Okay.
Right.
Now, what they did for 1 and 2 family dwellings. Let's see if this wording sounds similar to what we just read. Service disconnect shall be installed in a readily accessible outdoor location on or within sight of the 1 and 2 family dwelling.
Yeah.
Well, once again, depending on what becomes the first disconnecting means, it has to be within sight if it's outdoors. And this is tying in exactly. Now, the other thing that they did, and I paid real close attention to what I'm going to tell you, because they refer you over to 230.70, okay?
Yeah.
Now, if you look at B for your service disconnect marking, it says it'll be in accordance with 230.70B1 and 230.70B2, and it gets into the marking, and it says it'll be marked as a service disconnect, and look at here. It'll comply with 110.21B.
Right.
That gets to be interesting right there, because now they're telling you that you're going to have at that service disconnecting that's going to be marked out there. Look at this. It says emergency disconnect, service disconnect.
Right.
And then you have to comply with the markings in 110.21B. And you remember I went over this the other day. I said, if you're given a warning here, it's going to be what color? Orange.
Yep.
If it was a danger, it'd be red. If I was just giving a signaling of some type, it would be in yellow. Okay? And then they tell you here, it says, the marking shall be located on the outside front of the disconnect enclosure with a red background and white text, and the letters shall be at least 1.5 inches high.
See, and the one thing that I noticed on this is Willie Jackerson's going to be really bummed because that service that he's got inside his bathroom that's run across to the Walmart 15 amp is not going to be legal in 2026. So
Sure.
he's pretty bummed.
And look at this. I find this pretty interesting because it gets into the identification of other source disconnects. Okay,
Right.
let's take a look at it. It says where equipment for disconnection of other energy source systems is not located adjacent to the service disconnect required by this section, then you've got to have a plaque or directory identifying the location of all equipment for disconnection of energy sources shall be located adjacent to service disconnect. And then they tell you, here's some of them to look at. Well, what is one? 445.18, what's that deal with? Generators.
Yep.
You see what I'm saying? You go through here and just start looking. They're combining everything, making sure everything's marked properly here. Now, if you look at
because you could have separate sources of energy.
Sure.
Energy storage. You could have separate sources.
And then look at this.
Concern.
This is the most important part, and this ties into exactly what I was saying. Let's look at the requirements. Okay? Now it says, requirements related to emergency disconnects found in 230.85 the NEC have caused confusion in the electrical industry since it was not clear what specific type of disconnects were allowed to meet these requirements. It was also unclear how to ensure the emergency disconnect equipment is protected from available fault current. In addition, there has been a confusion when applying the requirements. Look at this. For grounding and bonding of Article 250 when an emergency disconnect is installed on the supply side of a service disconnecting means. So everything I've been saying up to this point is tying into exactly what I was saying. Now, I want to read the last sentence to this. It says, the change will resolve issues related to what type of equipment can be installed for the emergency disconnect, how grounding and bonding is required to be installed, and the issues related to available fault current are addressed by the fact that service equipment is required to have approved overcurrent protection.
Nice. Yeah, and I'm gonna let you kind of answer this first, James. Worm Bros has got a question in here, and he's asking if we think that they're doing this for unqualified personnel. With increase at transfer switches and PV and all this different energy storage.
I think they're doing it not. I think they're doing it for everybody, and I'll
Yeah,
explain why. Because
I agree.
when you're out there, when you got a transfer switch there, what how is that transfer switch being put in? Well, you're going to go over and look at separately derived systems, go look at 250.30, and based on the type of transfer switch you're doing, you got a 3-pole, 4-wire, are you using equipment ground to ground back over to that other energy supply source, or are you switching the neutral? That's what it comes down to. That all gets
Sure.
into the grounding. But in order to do that properly, you still got to ground at the emergency disconnect first, because excuse me, that is the first portion, or your first point, where you establish your grounding means. And then from there you go in. Now, that brings up a good point right there. And I'm waiting to see how they do this also, but I'm going to say you need to do this. Let's say you're outside and you have the emergency disconnect that's on the 1 and 2 family structure. All right,
Hmm.
and you come down and you hit a ground rod. Okay, I'm sorry. My ass is getting kicked tonight. Or let's say you go to a cold water pipe. Okay,
Hmm.
first of all, you got to determine, do you have 10 foot or more of copper in earth? And if you do, and you're using it as your grounding electrode, you need to come over, since it's there on the building. Now you also need to drive a ground rod. But if I'm 50 foot away, naturally you wouldn't take and use the cold water pipe. You see what I'm saying? It
Sure.
depends on where the emergency disconnect is set up, and then from there you start looking at your different type of grounding requirements. Okay.
Yeah, and typically, Dave let us do supplemental bonding with 2 ground rods. Um,
Sure.
6 to 8 foot apart. The way I'm gonna answer that, Worm Bros, is I'm basically gonna say that they're doing it for unqualified and qualified, because there's a lot of qualified personnel out there that need to know this information.
Sure
And
they do.
I agree with James in his assessment that there's a lot of more factors that just come into, like I say, not just like James has a good point with grounding and bonding, and stuff like that. So to me, I think they're doing it for consistency of unqualified and qualified, but that is a really good point, because there is a lot of provisions that's in the code for unqualified personnel, and it's I don't know. I guess I'm to the point where I'm kind of frustrated with that a little bit. I think that I think that the National Electric Code should not really cover too much of the unqualified. I mean, I think that we should, as far as like disconnecting power, stuff like that, but there's a lot of times where they say, well, you need to be labeling for the unqualified person, and kind of like we did in the myth with the fixture disconnects. I don't think that there should be unqualified people in there working on luminaires hot while energized. I just don't think that should be part of our code. Like, to me, that's why I thought that one was a stupid change. And the whole thing is, if you go look at the manufacturer instructions, it says no serviceable parts. So why are we even having unqualified people in there changing drivers and trying to work on stuff while energized in electrically unsafe work conditions? So to me, I think that's where it's about. Worm Bros is trying to bring everyone into this electrically safe work condition, whether it be on the utility side or whatever, just so that we all are aware of the available fault current and being lower than the short circuit current rating. So sorry to interrupt, James.
Oh, no worries,
That's
and
my
I agree
opinion.
with you. You know, and I've always say this: you can only protect so much. You
Yeah,
know, you can't just protect every little thing because you're going to have homeowners and stuff that get out there. There's a reason that the manufacturers have to put on their instructions: do not work on this energized.
yeah.
You know,
And the
unless you're
thing is,
qualified.
I really love having the good questions in the chat. So keep them coming, man. We love them.
Oh, sure. And now we used to look at 215.10 and look at 230.95. Well, now you're going to have an A and B here. All right. A is going to deal with AC systems, dealing with ground fault protection of equipment. But they've come in and now they've also want to ensure, so the committee is including DC systems. Okay. Because we know that you can have arcing faults, and this is addressing those systems that are anywhere from 150 volts to ground up to 1500 uh, votes line to line. So they have come in and they have added the ground fault protection of equipment for DC systems now.
Right.
And I think this might be the last one I did. Um, this, I thought this was interesting. All right. And they're, everybody says you cannot have overcurrent protection devices other than supplementary located in the bathroom, showering facilities, or locker rooms or showering facilities. But they did
Right.
put an exception here that you are permitted to install those in existing panel boards that were installed in compliance with previous editions of the code.
Oh, the grandfather clause.
The
Hmm.
grandfather clause came in.
Wow. All right. Yeah,
So,
that is interesting.
yeah, I saw that. I was like, oh, yeah, I might want to put that in there. So,